The war on ROMs continues, with websites like Vim's Lair and ROM hacking being the most recent casualties of the war. That's why when the great folks over at Stone Age Gamer offered to send over the Retrode 2 and the accessories for it, it made perfect sense to share it with you here on the channel. You see, the Retrode 2 is all about taking your cartridge-based games and backing them up to your computer over USB so you can have your own ROM library from your original games. This is exactly how you and I will come out winners in the war on ROMs, by taking things into our own hands and creating our own private ROM libraries so that no one can take them away from us. Inside the box you'll find 3 things. First, you'll find a quick start guide in English and German, the Retrode 2 main unit, and a USB mini to USB-C cable that provides both data and power to the Retrode 2. The front of the unit has 2 DE9 style 9-pin ports. They're used for connecting things like Sega Genesis and Sega Master System controllers. On both the right and the left side of the unit are controller ports that are designed for plugging in Super Nintendo controllers. And on the back of the unit is a USB mini port for connecting the data and power cable. But the real magic here comes from flipping open the top lid of the unit. This is where you'll find a Sega Genesis cartridge slot at the bottom of the unit and a Super Nintendo cartridge slot at the top. There are also push buttons in the bottom right corner to allow your computer to recognize when a new cartridge is inserted. Along with the Retrode 2, there are also a variety of adapters available to let you back up other game cartridges, including Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, game cartridges for the Sega Master System, and perhaps the most intriguing adapter of all, the ability to back up Nintendo 64 cartridges. I'll show you how to back up all of these games as well. Okay, now that everything's unboxed, let's take a look at the Retrode 2 system to see how it can help you with backing up your game library and some bonus features that will level up the way that you play your gaming setup. We'll need to make sure 2 key settings in File Explorer are set before you start using the Retrode 2. Go to File Explorer and then open up this PC. At the top navigation pane for File Explorer, click View, then come down to the bottom to Show and hover over it. Slide over to the right, then come down to the listing that says File Name Extensions and left click on it. This will put a check mark next to it and allow you to see the file name extensions for all of the files inside File Explorer. Next up, go up to View, click, come down to Show, hover over it, come down to Hidden Items and left click on it to put a check mark here. To verify that both of these are properly marked, go back up to View one more time and left click on it. Hover over Show and just make sure that you have a check mark next to both of these items before proceeding. Once you've verified that both of these settings have check marks next to them, you can just basically close out File Explorer for the moment because it's going to get reopened automatically in just a moment. Plug in the USB mini cable end of the USB cable into the USB mini port on the Retrode 2. Then plug in the other end of the cable into an open USB-A port on your computer. Depending on your version of Windows, you might be asked to install some drivers the first time you plug in the Retrode 2. But in this case, since I'm using Windows 11, it picked it up automatically and immediately mounted the Retrode 2 as a drive. Every time you plug in the Retrode 2, you'll see this configuration file. We'll talk about what's in this file and the changes that you can make a little later on in the video. For now, you can just close out File Explorer. Okay, let's back up the first game cartridge with the Retrode 2. In this case, Sonic Spinball for the Sega Genesis. The Genesis port is at the front of the unit, and all you have to do is put it in with the label facing towards you and push directly down. Most game cartridges get picked up automatically, but if yours doesn't, just press this button right here. Just as if you'd plugged in a USB drive or SD card, File Explorer will open automatically, and you'll see a new File Explorer window appear with the Genesis ROM file shown right here. In this case, the ROM file has been dumped as a .bin file, which is compatible with emulators like RetroArch for playing Genesis games. To back up the game cartridge, right-click on that ROM file and select Copy. I have a folder that I've pre-staged on here called Demo. Your computer probably doesn't have this. I just have it on here to be able to showcase things on YouTube. So I'm going to click into the Demo folder. Also, I think it makes sense to save your ROMs in folders just to keep things a little better organized. So I'm going to create a new folder here and just name this folder Sega Genesis. But of course, you can save your ROM files in any folder or subfolder structure that works for you. Now that there's a Sega Genesis folder here, I'll double click into it. Now I'm going to right click and select Paste. This is going to copy the ROM data over from the cartridge directly into this subfolder in .bin format. I mean, how cool is this? We just backed up a Sega Genesis cartridge in a matter of seconds. If you don't like the way a file name turned out, no worries. You can rename it. Just click on it once, then click on it twice. For example, I'm going to get rid of these alphanumeric characters here and just keep the file name as sonicspinball.bin. For games that don't have save files associated with them, you can just name it whatever you like. I think it's worth pointing out something here before you close out File Explorer. If you head over to this PC, you'll see that the Retrode 2 is mounted just like any other USB drive. This feature of the Retrode 2 will come into play in the video in just a moment. For now, once you're done dumping a game, you can close out the File Explorer window because every time that you reinsert a new cartridge into the Retrode 2, a new File Explorer window is going to get opened anyway, automatically. Genesis cartridge dumped successfully. Let's take a look at dumping a Super Nintendo cartridge, and also one that actually has save games on the cartridge. In this case, Super Mario World. Unlike Sega Genesis cartridges, you can't insert them with the label facing you. Instead, Super Nintendo cartridges need to be flipped around 180 degrees and inserted with the label facing away from you. And if you don't see the File Explorer window pop up, don't forget to press this button at the bottom right corner of the unit. If you push the button on the Retrode 2, you'll normally get a USB eject sound and a USB insert sound from Windows, along with the opening of File Explorer. If you look here, you'll see that there are actually two files here. The first one is the Super Mario World ROM file itself in SFC format, and the other file is the save data file from the cartridge in .srm format. To copy the game and the save file, highlight both of them, right-click, and select Copy. I'm going to go back to the demo folder here and create a new subfolder. I'm going to name this folder Nintendo SNES because I'm going to be backing up other games as well that are Nintendo based, and just to keep things a little better organized, I'll name each of these subfolders with the console manufacturer name first and the name of the console second. Alright, I'm going to drill into the SNES folder, right click, and select Paste. And just like that, the ROM data and the save data from your game cartridge are backed up on your computer. There's a unique consideration if you're going to change the file names of your game ROM and your game save. They both need to have exactly the same name, or when you go to run them in the emulator will not be able to match up the game ROM and the game save together. By the way, if you're looking at those file names and the lowercase w is driving you nuts like it did me, here's a workaround to fix this. If you just type the capital W, it's not going to save it into the file name because it basically sees the two file names as alike. If you type the capital W and then just put a space before the W and hit the return key on the keyboard, it'll log in this change. Now you can go right back into those file names and delete the extra space. And in this case, it will preserve the capital letter W for both the ROM file and for the save game file. Okay, let's back up a game using one of the adapters. We'll start with the Sega Master System adapter shown here. Of the three adapters that go with the Retrode 2, the Master System adapter is the one that puts a death grip on its cartridges. The pins are super tight, and I had to wrestle with it to be able to get the Master System game into it. But since it involves some wrestling, I like this quote from Robert Strauss. He said that success is like wrestling a gorilla. You don't quit when you're tired, you quit when the gorilla's tired. So I kept at it, and yeah, I was able to get the two connected. In all fairness, the tighter the pins are when an adapter like this is new, the longer it's likely to last. I found in most cases, it makes good sense to connect the cartridge to the adapter first, and then put the tandem into the correct slot on the Retrode 2. By the way, this is Monopoly for the Sega Master System, but did you see that not so great way that they wrote the title on the cartridge? Monopoly for the win. Strangely enough, they didn't name the files on the cartridge Monopoly either. But of course, this isn't a problem because you can rename the ROM file, the .sms file, and the .sav file to anything you want as long as those two file names match. So backing up Master System game files is exactly like backing up any of the other types of content that you can back up with the Retrode 2. Highlight the files you want to copy, right-click, and select Copy. In this case, I'm going to go back to the demo folder and create a new folder here and call this one Sega Master System. Now that there's a new subfolder for the Master System, I'll double-click into it. Then you can just right-click and select Paste to paste in both the ROM file and the save game file. Then you can just rename these two files to whatever works for you so long as the two file names match. While Monopoly certainly has a fancy ring to it, I think I'll just name these Monopoly. Next up, let's dump some Game Boy games with the Game Boy adapter. The Game Boy adapter was the easiest of the three to get cartridges in and out of. I'll start by backing up a copy of my wife's favorite Game Boy game, Amazing Penguin. It slid right into the cartridge slot with no problems. Just like with Master System games, the adapter goes into the front Sega Genesis slot on the Retrode 2. And if you don't see File Explorer pop up, don't forget to push the button on the bottom right corner. In this case, I did have to push the button on the bottom right in order to get the game recognized through the Retrode 2 over USB to Windows, but it certainly worked just fine. And in this case, the game name itself is already perfect with no adjustments needed. Saves an extra step after all. Just like with any of the other types of game files, right-click on the ROM file and select Copy. Again, I'm going to go to this demo folder, and remember, it's not something on your computer. I just use it for the purposes of showing things off on YouTube. I'll create a new folder here and name this Nintendo Game Boy. I'll double-click into the subfolder, then right-click and select Paste to paste the Game Boy ROM in this folder. A quick note here before moving on. Because this is a Game Boy-based adapter, you can back up also Game Boy Color games and Game Boy Advance games in the exact same slot, including great Game Boy Color games like Pokemon Pinball with ugly 3D printed battery covers. And because the slot on this adapter doesn't have a death grip on the cartridges, you can just leave the adapter in the Retrode 2 and freely swap in and out the cartridges of your choice, just like this Game Boy Advance version of Super Mario World. Just don't forget to push that button in the bottom right corner if the game is not read by File Explorer. Next up, let's back up an N64 game. These cartridges tend to have the largest ROM sizes and take the longest amount of time to back up, but it's still a fast and easy process overall. So here's the N64 adapter for the Retrode 2. I'm going to back up my physical copy of the game The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. It takes a moderate degree of force to push the N64 cartridge into the adapter, but remember, the more tension that's on the pins on the adapter now, the longer it's going to last. And just like the other adapters, it goes in the Sega Genesis slot at the front of the Retrode 2. And be sure to press the button on the bottom right corner if Windows does not automatically recognize that you've plugged in an N64 adapter. Once Windows recognizes your game and File Explorer pops up, you'll see two files here. There's a save game file, which is the .sra file, and then there's a ROM file, which is the .z64 file. Just like with any other backup that involves a ROM file and a save file, highlight both of these and select Copy. Again, I'm going to go back to the demo folder and then create a new subfolder inside here and name this subfolder Nintendo 64. Into the subfolder I go by double-clicking and then right-click inside the subfolder and select Paste to back up both the ROM file and the save file from the cartridge. So there's more than one Zelda game for the Nintendo 64, and since this is just called The Legend of Zelda, you might consider updating the file names for both the ROM file and the save file, especially if you only plan to use them in something like emulation. There, now that looks much better. Renaming files like this is fine for emulation, but what about if you want to write a save game file to your cartridge? For now, I'm going to leave Ocarina of Time in the Retrode 2 so we can test this out. I'll start by backing up that save file by right-clicking on it and selecting Copy. I'm going to go back to the demo folder here, but I'm not going to go into any of the subfolders. I just want to go to the demo folder and have a place to copy this backup file. So I'll paste it right here in the root of the demo folder. Don't rename this save file. Make sure that the save file name matches the original save file name on the cartridge. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the cartridge here on the Retrode 2 and delete this save game file off of the cartridge. Right-click, select Delete, and select Yes at the confirmation prompt. Okay, there's no save game data on the cartridge any longer. To write back to the cartridge, I'm going to go back to the demo folder where that save file is, and then right-click on it and select Copy. I'll go back in the navigation structure back over to the Retrode 2 where the Ocarina of Time cartridge lives. Right-click and select Paste. And just like that, a save game file has been written to the N64 Ocarina of Time cartridge. Andrew from Stone Age Gamer passed along a note to me about writing save files to cartridges. If you get a message that says you can't write to the cartridge, you'll need to go into the configuration file and make one key change. So to do this, I'm going to go to Open With and open it with Notepad. Take a look at this specific line of text in the settings file. Make sure that the number 1 is entered here in the text. This allows the Retrode 2 to take those saved game files and write them back to your cartridges. So the Retrode 2 is more than just a one-trick pony. Check this out. Remember how you saw earlier that there are Genesis and Super Nintendo controller ports on the Retrode 2? I'm going to plug in a genuine SNES controller. You see, you can also use the Retrode 2 as a controller dock to plug in genuine Super Nintendo and Genesis controllers for use with emulators on your computer. In this example, RetroArch has recognized that the Retrode 2 is connected over USB and can be used as a controller input in the emulators. So let's test this controller functionality and one of the ROMs that was previously dumped in the video, in this case, Super Mario World. So I'm going to go to Load Content here and click on it. You'll have to pick the path where your games are located if you're going to launch one-off ROM titles like this. In this case, it's on drive letter D, and it's in a subfolder called Demo. Then in another subfolder called Nintendo SNES. So here's that copy of Super Mario World that we backed up previously in the video. Click on it and then select an emulation core. In this case, I'm going to use the SNES 9X emulator. Click on the core and you'll see that the Retrode has also been recognized and used as an input for Super NES gameplay, and the ROM that we dumped previously in the video works perfectly. But the Retrode 2 still has one more trick up its sleeve. You can actually play your physical games through the Retrode 2 connected to the USB on your computer in emulation. So to do this, I've put the Super Mario World cartridge back in the Retrode 2. To play your actual physical game inside RetroArch, just like you would load a ROM, you go to Load Content and click on Load Content. You'll be presented with a list of storage locations just like before. Remember how we looked at this PC earlier and identified the Retrode as Drive F? If you click on Drive F here, you'll see the same ROM file that we previously backed up. Click on it to load it, and then select the emulator of your choice, in this case, SNES 9X. And just like RetroArch loads ROM files and plays them, you can also now play your real physical game cartridges with real controllers through emulation through the power of the Retrode 2. The Retrode 2 is an ideal system for backing up these types of cartridge games. But what about if you have a system that uses optical discs and you want to back those up instead? This video shown on screen and linked in the description and pinned comment will show you how to use your modded Wii to back up your favorite Wii and GameCube discs.